Hey everyone, thanks for stopping by. Today I'm joined by a very special guest, Leslie Powers, who is a clinical psychologist of many years. In this episode, we're going to be getting into the mechanics of healing through therapy, what healing actually is, what trauma is, and how natural law can relate to the healing process. That's coming up next. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the Wizard Factory podcast for another episode where together we explore the universe through ourselves. My name is Logan Hart. If you're new here and not a subscriber, please subscribe down below and hit that bell so you never miss a new video. I'm joined today by the lovely Leslie Powers, who is a clinical social worker, a martial artist, a nature lover, presenter, and student of natural law. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm very excited for our conversation today. Welcome, Leslie.
Thanks, Logan. I'm really happy to be here.
Great.
It's an honor.
So I'd love to start off by just talking a bit about you. How did you sort of get into that line of work of healing, and specifically from a professional level, but where did that all begin for you?
Big question. So I would say from the professional inspiration, started in like a 10th grade psychology course. I had a good teacher, and it just became clear, like it was like a calling to study more around psychology. And I was always interested in philosophy as well, and had a lot of deep thoughts as a kid. And I think a big part of it, a lot of people go into this field because of this desire to want to help everybody, or they come from their own trauma. I probably came more from, I really was curious. I wanted to understand about life. I wanted to understand about people and why things are the way they are. And I care about, people and the planet and want to help. But it's been a process of expanding my understanding of life. And so I went into I did my undergraduate in psychology, and then I got a master's in social work, and just sort of jumped into the field and did a whole lot of diverse jobs. And then in the last 12 or 14 years, I've been doing psychotherapy, mental health counseling, working with people with trauma. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So you've really gotten to see from the ground level sort of what works, what gets results. And that's extremely important, I think, because these days there's so much talk about healing, but a lot of it just seems like hot air to me. And that we're just talking about healing, and it's all great, but I don't know that there's that much healing actually happening, especially when you look at people's behavior and see how often people are acting out of unconscious trauma and doing less than ideal things, and how they treat each other and things like that. So
totally great observation. And I also do some clinical supervision, and I was just saying to someone today, that we have to get out of the intellectual understanding of things. There's information everywhere, people can read all sorts of things, but that isn't what creates the healing. The healing is very much an experiential process. And most people avoid that. Most people avoid doing the work that is really required to heal from traumas, because it's scary, it's hard, and they don't know how. It's not taught. It's not something that we learn about.
That's a huge one right there too. It can feel extremely overwhelming. First of all, to be honest with yourself, you have to recognize there's just a lot of work involved. It's not just like you do one ayahuasca retreat or something like that and then you're all good. Like, really, I view it as a lifelong practice. I mean, it's like a lifestyle that you're always, if you're not working on deep stuff, there's at least even that maintenance level of just how much
Yes.
bullshit that we're constantly being subjected to that is trauma-based mind control on a daily basis. So just to keep, like break even, you got to make
Yeah.
healing a part of your daily practice.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I like that you can clear a lot of trauma, especially, the big trauma. You can do some work that clears a lot of that, but there's a lot of maintenance work. You have to be vigilant to keep the habits of wellness going, and the awareness, the self reflection. And our bodies and minds are so interconnected. It's all one, right? They're not really separate. So we're being bombarded with all sorts of pollution
Hmm.
from the outside that's definitely going to impact how we feel mentally and physically and spiritually.
Right.
Yeah.
So you kind of got the spark when you were in college. You had a good professor, and that sort
In
of,
high school,
oh
actually,
yeah,
10th
right,
grade.
right, sorry.
Yeah.
And that sort of inspired you, and so you dove into the sort of academic side, right? And you did pursue that, like from a
Hmm.
professional, like a degree level.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
I would be interested to hear how much of that you ended up having to unlearn when you
Hmm.
started actually working and trying to help people and seeing what sounds good on
Yeah.
paper versus what is actually
Hmm.
not only useful and practical, but also that aligns with a more holistic perspective and not just prescribing,
Hmm.
pills and that sort of thing.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, I'll start by saying I had one particularly good professor who refused to teach the DSM-5 3 at the time, which is the diagnostic manual. And a lot of the students in the class were getting really upset. Like, we have to learn the diagnostic manual. How are we going to work if we don't know? And he was like, you're going to learn it on the job. That's just something you got to do to pay insurance, right? But that's not what's helping you to help people. And he brought it down to principles of understanding a person in a situation and to understand their locus of control, or do they have a sense of being that their control and their solutions to problems comes from within, or does it come from something outside of themselves? And so that's where I was like, yeah, that's it, right? So that's about the only thing I remember of real
Mm.
use from my graduate program. And I mean, there might be some other minor things, but that was the main thing, was this guy who's talking about really looking at people and situations. And so I feel like most of my learning has been through the experiential world, right? In a lot of settings. And I've worked in agencies most of my career. And that means these nonprofit, most of them, not all, but government. Ultimately, these are the agencies that the government is funding to help people. And what I come to see is it feels like we're just another cul-de-sac, right?
Mm.
Because the system, the government, the culture we're in is sort of creating so many mental health problems, so many all types of health problems. And then they of a department or put in some money to find therapists or social workers to just work with effects, right? It's pretty much all effects oriented. That's not addressing real causes. Um, some therapies do get to that, but that didn't come to me really through my, I wouldn't say really through my education, in mainstream college. It helped to understand human, like, learning theory. That was what, like, one of the things in my high school that he taught us was about, you know, learning. How do people learn? So there was the Pavlov dogs and the classical conditioning, which was a relevant, very important concept that does apply to what we're experiencing in today's world. And the Skinnerian learning theory of, you know, you push the mice pushes the lever and he gets a pellet, right? So in a way, that is helping to understand a lot of this conditioning and mind control that's happening in the world when you look back to that. But natural law and the occult, is not at all addressed, in mainstream education.
True. I find that fascinating that the thing you actually remember from school was the one thing that was kind of going against the grain and saying,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we're not going to do it that way. This is what's actually useful. That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
So, how would you summarize your method or your technique when it comes to, say, you get a new patient, you clean slate, and what are the steps that you go through to kind of get to the root of the problem and then how to actually shift that?
Right. When people step into, asking for help, they tend to be a bit scared, nervous, apprehensive, unsure. Even those that have been therapized a lot, because there is, a foundation of healing through, counseling is that relationship and the sense of safety, because
Mhm.
we're all very well defended, and we come in with our defenses. So that first step is building a relationship, a connection, to create a sense of safety, allow that person to feel safe. And then we start doing what an assessment, looking at their life, looking at their patterns, identifying what the symptoms are.
Mhm.
Usually they're coming in with symptoms, so we identify those symptoms and the problems that's creating in their lives, because that creates motivation. They're motivated for change, or they wouldn't be showing up. And that's because there's a pain point. There's pain happening. And from that pain comes a desire to alleviate that suffering. And that's motivation. So that's an important aspect. And sometimes stepping into the process of like self-discovery is painful. It's hard. So I after doing some assessment and getting a sense of what the heart of the matter is, I will usually help people. I'll assess their skill level, like what kind of self skills do they have to regulate distress, to tolerate, what's their distress tolerance level, how much insight do they have, um, how much do they know themselves, where is that locus of control? Is it, do they feel like a victim, are they, or not, or are they feeling empowered in the world? And depending on what, I tend to be pretty person-centered, and where they, I'm not going to go where they don't want to go,
Mhm.
right? But I certainly will guide them in a direction that I know will help get to the heart of the matter. I don't like to stay in the superficialities, And I am trained in EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I help a person to identify their goals, to decide what it is they want to focus on, what they want better in their lives. We work on, I get solution focused and task centered. I like for people to have kind of concrete things to practice and do and work on, because there's a lot of skills, that enhance our mastery of ourselves,
Mhm.
and have the tolerance to be able to face the painful things. And there's a lot of reflection, going on, where I'm, going to be sort of reflecting back what I observe, what I see, what they say, and how they present. And there's, my style is very nurturing, but yet, I nurture and then I address the issue, directly. And, it's kind of a back and forth thing. I sometimes, we address specific traumas. I can use EMDR or some other approaches for that. I like to, teach people, a lot of mindfulness skills and grounding and ability to be able to, because that builds confidence. If they know that when they're getting triggered, that they can regulate themselves, then that builds confidence, that allows us to go to the next step. There's a lot of defenses. So identifying the defenses that happen and help to neutralize them so that we can actually get to the wound and do the real healing.
That's very interesting.
It's complicated. It's hard to summarize, right? Because it's a lot of things.
Right. So again, it's safe to say you can't expect to just fix everything in one session. It takes a long time.
No.
You build rapport with this person, you build safety, because I mean, thinking about it, most people don't even have that safety within themselves, let alone another person. So that in itself has to be quite a large task there. So, and it's really, from what I'm getting from what you're saying, it's more just about kind of teaching them tools to change how they're responding to things, because
partly.
Okay.
Partly.
Well, okay.
I would say that's one part of the work where we're helping them to gain insight and to have tools to master, their state, change state tools. So if you're starting to panic, how do you regulate yourself, right? And then, but that I feel like is just the setting the stage to be able to almost tolerate the real difficult stuff that's being avoided. So I'm going to check out where they're at, and then I'm going to try to enhance that so they're functioning, and then build their awareness and insight about their like psychological anatomy, or to map their psychology, to understand their coping mechanisms and the defenses and the way they've compartmentalized themselves, because when we go through trauma, and the trauma could be an acute kind of clear, like I got into a car accident, or I was abused physically or sexually or emotionally or whatever. And so we can identify those easily, but there's a lot of things that are traumatic that are about repetition and just creating high stress levels. And what becomes traumatizing is pretty subjective. And two people could have the same event, and one have real severe kind of trauma reactions and the other not. And the more that people are subjected to the like smaller traumas that are repetitive and chronic stress, and the way that basically we're all living our lives here in the United States, it's making it their tolerance, like if a big trauma hits, then it can be more detrimental. It can cause more problems, So the people, who've had a lot of abuse in their life, they start to crack a bit. Those defenses don't work, and they're not able to stay in a psychological like window of tolerance of their emotions getting triggered up and down. And so if somebody's in that state, you really work on helping them to be able to be in a window of tolerance and to make friends with themselves and their own bodies, and learn how to feel safe and all of that. But, there's a point where, to some degree, there's a clearing that needs to happen of the stuckness, the trauma that gets stuck in our systems, it gets stuck in our bodies. And as I'm learning more and more, in your energetic body, and it can affect our thoughts, based on, what our fear, So if someone learns that the world is unsafe, that's going, if that's their script, they're going to respond to things differently than someone who feels that the world is generally safe,
Right. So it's like you're saying that first you build the safety, then you kind of give them some tools to help them a little bit with kind of self-stability, and that's going to give them the fortitude to then finally start getting in there and kind of digging in the dirt and getting into the roots and everything like that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's a good summary. That's a good summary.
You have to kind of, no, it's fascinating. I love this. And I've never really learned much about the process of clinical psychology versus like I said, things like plant medicine, meditation, these other kind of modalities that are more of a self-help kind of, I don't even know what the word is. What you're doing is dealing directly with the person and their mind. You're not relying on a
Hmm.
chemical to change the structure of their brain or something like that. You're actually using words to explore the different neural pathways and figure out where they lead back to until you're getting to the root of it.
Yeah. And I'll just add the part about even with the interconnect doing, there's teletherapies become huge, right? And it's not as optimal as being in the same room with someone, but it's better than being on the phone. And you
Sure.
know what I mean? So the more that we're able to sort of be in an energetic connection, that connection also has healing to it. So there's something healing about being witnessed, being validated, being seen, being
Being
understood,
loved.
being accepted, being loved. Like, people come in with deep things they're deeply shamed about, right? Very a lot of shame, and that is what they don't want to be that to be seen, because their self-identity, part of their identity is about that shame. and and so that's why that safety is important, because they can start to reveal and step into that and know that they're like accepted through the process of transformation and change.
That's
Right.
so fascinating. It's reminding me of, I've been kind of digging a little bit into Wim Hof, if you're familiar with him.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it's reminding me of what he's describing when he does these retreats and stuff. I think a lot of people miss this. They think about the breathing or the ice baths and stuff like that. But he talks about the human family essentially and how
Yeah.
it's about loving each other and saying we're in this together. And
Hmm.
it just breaks my heart to think about,
Yeah.
because that is the connection that we've lost in this modern
I know.
society.
Yeah.
We're so
It's been
disconnected
attacked.
and operating as strangers for the most part,
Yeah.
especially just out and
Covering up
about.
faces,
Oh, yeah, that's even
right?
worse.
I mean, even missing, you can't fully even interpret another person without seeing all the muscles in their face. Like, it gives you information and
Mm,
connection, to see each other, to have eye contact, to the presence of people coming together, being together is really powerful. And this whole internet thing is it's okay, but it doesn't have the same power, of people coming together,
right.
but
It can be a
mhm.
catalyst for that, but it's not that thing in and of itself.
It's not as
It's not a
deeply fulfilling
replacement.
and healing. Right, right. It's kind of like, thinking that, a child doesn't need to be held, you
Right.
know, to stick the bottle in their mouth, right? That they don't have to see mom's eyes and, gaze at each other.
That's so true.
Right.
So, what is healing to you? How would you define that?
Hmm. Healing. It's like finding yourself. you know, it's like reconnecting with who you really are,
Mm,
with your true self, the self that never leaves us. That's connected to source, and that is and I think healing is also about self-love, loving oneself, and knowing oneself, right? So healing really involves self-reflection and being self-responsible, being able to understand how you operate, and then to develop, relationships, right? To have meaningful connections with other people, to have a creative, the ability that you're expressing your creative energy, that you are, stepping into the world fully as you, because, and a lot of people don't know, you know. we have to like excavate ourselves out of all the crap that's on top of us and the scar tissue and all of that to find out who we are and our connection to source and our ultimate infinite possibility as a human.
Right.
Yeah.
It reminds me of how the word heal, it comes from the Germanic word meaning whole. Heal and
Yeah.
whole are the same word. So when you're
Yeah.
unhealed, you're broken. That's why people say that. But that really means, I mean, when you study, especially like the MK Ultra and the trauma,
Mhm.
that kind of stuff, it literally breaks your psyche into pieces, like
Yes.
fractured.
Yes.
And so to heal, you're becoming whole again with yourself. You're one with yourself. You're not at odds with yourself. You're not at war with yourself. And you're
Yeah.
loving yourself because love at its essence is about that oneness, that connection, that coming back together, bringing those broken pieces back in, and integrating.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, and so the brain science, seems to be validating that definition.
Mm,
And when what happens with trauma is that we start to compartmentalize
yes.
within our own mind.
Like the
So
Titanic.
if you, mm-hmm. If you've had like a terrible thing happen to you, our bodies adapt in an amazing way, but the adaptations do things like dissociate from it, bury it, numb yourself to it. And that's necessary so that we can get up and go to work or, do what we need to do in our lives. And so over and over and over, we're creating, more and more separation within
Right.
ourselves to compensate for the lack of fully, healing those wounds. And, there's therapies that are really about like identifying the parts of us and then getting to know those parts and why they were created, what's the wound that they're protecting you from, because all of those compartments are meant to protect you because you're feeling threatened, have been hurt in some way. So yes, it is about becoming whole through knowing, reconnecting those parts, having them know about each other, work with each other, um, be modulated to a place that isn't like extreme and it's, like an addiction, for example.
Mm. Right, because what is that but an attempt to connect with something in place of yourself? It's like a proxy connection, but that thing can't love you. In fact, it's almost always some sort of self-destructive behavior because you're it's coming from that unhealed place. It's not true connection. It's a substitute.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
that separation that you were talking about there, it's like a temporary solution to the pain, to the wounding. It's not meant
Mm-hmm.
to be lived in perpetuity. It's like a let's slap a tourniquet on it right quick in an emergency situation and I'll deal with it later. But then we never
Yeah.
do. And then we just keep
Yeah.
adding and compounding it instead.
Yeah, it's fairly superficial. So you're just getting the flames that are coming out the windows, but you're not putting out the fire that's
Hmm,
inside the house.
it's a great analogy.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
then what is it that constitutes trauma? Because as you were saying before we were discussing that, you said the same person or two people can have the same experience
Mhm.
and one person
Mhm.
have trauma and the other one not. So that's very
Yeah.
interesting because it's not solely reliant on the experience itself, but also the person.
Yeah. So it's defined um, technically as an experience that you feel that your life is being threatened or someone you love their life, like there's a sense of impending death and destruction of self on some level, and or it's an experience that's just outside of your ability to tolerate or comprehend,
Mm,
right? And that it becomes like so shocking and disrupting to your sense of self and safety in the world that your system kind of doesn't know what to do with it, right? And it goes into this defensive protective mode. So, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, bodies try to adapt to defend and protect ourselves. So it's the self-defense principle kind of wired into our body. But it's unconscious. And so, like, for example, in Monarch Mind Control or, MKUltra or whatever, they're bombarding, people with so many horrific things, often at the same time, and confusing their reality to the place where, they don't know what's up or down, right? And so I think in a lot of ways, we can look at our normal life and see different ways that we're stressed to the max, like we're pushed beyond our capacity to really properly process emotion or take care of our bodies, and over time it wears us down. It wears our nervous system down. And the more that we're like bombarded and bombarded and bombarded, that in itself kind of becomes a trauma in itself. I think I see it that way. I felt that in my own life.
Yeah, I've heard it called like complex PTSD because it's sort of compounding and building on top of itself.
Yeah. And a lot of the complex trauma, and the folks that I've worked with, they've had, let's say poverty, alcoholic parents, abandonment by parents, physical abuse, sexual abuse, berating, emotional abuse,
Mm.
being left without, any real parenting, and they got to figure it out and take care of their sibling too. And then they're responsible for everything. Like, that's very common for a lot of people. Those one or multiple of those. And then, you go through the school system, and then you might have a learning disability and you're called stupid, or you get bullied, or you fail, or whatever, like life becomes very complex and affects our psyches.
Absolutely. I think it's really interesting you use the word process and comprehend. Those are words that stood out to me when you were describing that, because I think that's really what it is like you said, the same event can happen. It's about,
Mm-hmm.
can you process it in a way that is healthy and truthful, I would say is important too, because that's kind of what that does. When you think of mental illness, it usually comes from a form of trauma most of the time, and it is disruptive of that person's sense of reality. So it
Mm-hmm.
warped them in some kind of way. It's almost like trying to feed too much information through your brain to the speed that it can't process, so it warps the reality there. That's why,
Yeah, kind of. I was just thinking of the like an electrical current that gets overloaded and it just sort of like explodes or something,
yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. It's because it's all energy, right? It's energy that is being
Mhm.
kind of moved through a person's experience in this context.
And or get stuck, right? It can get stuck and buried.
That's true too.
And and when you're constantly facing multiple traumas, it's going to get more and more deeply stuck, and you're compartmentalizing more and more. And there's also like, what is the context? What is the social support around an experience? So, and you could have, let's say, for example, the thought came to me of like the sun dancers, right? These are these guys that are like not eating and not drinking, and they're enduring physical pain, but they're there in a context that is they're kind of heroic, they're um, that would probably not be a traumatic experience. It would be like a something that was amazing that they did, overcame. But if you did that to a little kid, in a dark room with electric currents, or I don't know, like something like that in a different context, it's traumatic.
Mm.
And So a lot of it has to do with, is it something that you're doing, how is it related to your community, to the purpose? Are you supported? Are you loved? So that's a piece of it. The other thing that affects trauma is the early relationships. So their attachment,
Mm.
the qualities of their attachment to their caregivers, and that sets the stage for the relationship for all their life. And so people who are most vulnerable are the people that had insecure attachments in their early relationships. So they had caregivers that weren't consistent, or they were, not present. They're depressed, they're abusive, they're alcoholic, whatever, there's lots of things. Or they give mixed messages, they loved you and took care of you, but then they molested you. That's going to set a stage for a really big disruption in
Mm.
relationships. Um, so there's a lot. So the mental, kind of back to the Sundance, it's how are we viewing? What is the mind, the mental framework of what's happening to us?
Exactly.
That can make it.
And that's only as good as your ability to discern and process, like you said, and to comprehend. That's why certain things could be perceived and actually constitute trauma, say for a child. It's often the case because children don't have that yet. They don't fully understand the world. They don't fully understand what's happening. And something might actually have been relatively benign, but because
Mm-hmm.
of their inability to fully process and comprehend that experience, it created a
Mm-hmm.
trauma. And then it just carried on
Yeah.
into their adult life because they never had the tools to actually just go back and reframe, like you said, process it, reframe and then process it with the new, more true and
Mm-hmm.
realistic understanding of it.
Yeah. So think of a child very egocentric just by the way their physiology is made. And so things that happen, things they experience that their parents do, that adults do
They take it
in their
personally.
environment, yeah, it becomes about them. So mom and dad are fighting, and they're ignoring the child, or then they snap at the child, because they're upset. That child usually will interpret that as something wrong with them, that it's their fault, right?
Mm,
And unless the parent is kind of attuned enough to reassure the child that it's not about them, and give them the nurturing and the love, and compensate for that stress with positive connection, that child could grow up with this negative script about themselves being, the cause of problems, of other people's problems, right?
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as we were discussing, it shows up a lot in interpersonal relationships because as a child,
Mm-hmm.
you're in those formative years. Your brain is developing. Everything that happens is going to have a large impact on how you're able to process and comprehend the world, and specifically in relationships, because that's usually how trauma comes about. And
Mm-hmm.
especially true of, when they say most crimes are committed by people, especially true of children because they're a little bit more guarded. There's a smaller circle that even has access to that child to the
Mm-hmm.
degree of impact. And so it's usually people that are like the closest, their parents, siblings, things like that, that are building,
Yeah.
set, like you said, setting the stage. So these are the people that are supposed to be teaching them what love is, teaching them
Yeah.
what safety is, and they're
Mm-hmm.
they're exhibiting abuse in the place of that. So then they're going to associate that's what love is. And then that's why people become addicted
Mm-hmm.
to drama because, as
Mm-hmm.
crazy as that sounds, that's what they feel safe with because that was
Yeah.
the norm.
The
Right.
familiar place. Yeah. And I think that children will act out, right? They're sort of the expressor, they symptomize the problems of their family, their parents, the world, right? It's and yet we're not really addressing the underlying root causes and the systems and, helping really get to the heart of the matter. Like, I mean, you look at the government's answers, it's none of it is, they're perpetuating the trauma, and they're putting band-aids on to keep us distracted, out here in the land of effects, and putting money into like a child getting therapy in school or something, when that's not really true healing. That's not, we need to heal the families, the community, the world, in other ways. But the individual work matters at the same time. Like it's also the answer, is all of us doing our work.
Right. So how would you compare in terms of effectiveness and importance, maybe, between those sort of self-healing modalities such as plant medicines and meditation and I don't know, breath work, some of those kind of versus what you practice? Where's the place for those things in the grand scheme of
Yeah.
things?
I don't know, I think of it like each one is maybe a petal on a flower, right?
Hmm.
And the flower is the whole thing. I don't think any one thing is the answer. I think a holistic approach, and it's individual what kind of resonates with an individual, in terms of some of those alternative, what you might call, what people call alternative modalities. And and I've worked in medical settings, and I've seen, even though I understand the whole downside of the pharmaceutical world, there I have seen times when that use of a psychotropic medicine has helped a person to be able to do the work that they need to do.
Right.
So it's not black and white, right?
And
And
that's
it's
meant to
also
be
not every,
a stepping stone. It's not like you just, well, once you're on this drug, then you're fine and you just keep taking it for the rest of your life. It's meant to
yeah,
be a tool that you can use till you get where you want to be, and then you don't need it anymore.
and in collaboration with other deeper means of healing. Um, and people need to use discernment about what they do. Not everyone should go just do an ayahuasca journey, because not everybody's going to have the capacity to handle
Hmm.
that.
Just setting themselves up for new
And
trauma. Yeah.
possibly, that having guides or some, again, I want to emphasize the importance of connection with people. And that really is one of the biggest healing modalities. Most of the people I work with are extremely painfully lonely
Mm.
and isolated.
Yeah.
And the world, the way it's been going, is encouraging that isolation. And people could have all the material goods in the world and be pretty miserable in their isolation. And it's also self-inflicted, where I've talked to people where they are so alone, and yet they're so afraid. Had their experiences in their life that have led to them feeling so distrustful and so afraid of other people that they won't step into any type of community support system. And I think that's really sad, because I think that one of the answers is really developing real help, real communities again.
Hmm.
And being able to face your fears around connection and push through the loss of trust. I think we all, like, even in the freedom community, and we could do better, I think, at connecting and trusting each other and developing those networks of support. We are not meant to be operating in isolation.
Yeah. Couldn't agree
We we,
more.
we need it.
We're highly
Mm-hmm.
social beings, and love is such a powerful force in general. And you can't, I mean, you can have self-love, but that only takes you so far. And I think you're not completely in, I don't know, like an ideal or you're not maximizing your potential if you're not stepping into that realm out of fear of being hurt or that sort of thing. It kind of reminded
Yeah.
me when you were talking about that of another thing that's not necessarily black and white when it comes to being in a like a romantic relationship, because you hear
Mhm.
people say, you need to be alone on your own first. If you're, I don't know, there's no one way to approach it, but I guess what I'm trying to say is there can be great healing in that sort of a partnership, as long as you're being very emotionally responsible and you're not projecting all that on them. You're not expecting them to be your savior or your therapist or anything.
Mhm.
You're carrying your own weight in that dynamic. I do believe that
Mhm.
if you're fortunate enough to manifest that, that can be incredibly healing to find that kind of partner that will show you what love can be and that it can be safe. And even going deeper into like the sexual domain, especially for those who have sexual trauma,
Mhm.
that can go
Mhm.
really deep and far there. But again, it has to
Yeah.
be the right circumstances, and oftentimes it's not, because like I said, they're projecting, they're blaming, and pushing that
Yeah.
person away.
Yeah. Yeah. There is a great opportunity for healing in healthy relationships. And for that to happen, the individuals need to be whole, as whole as possible, right? Like you work on yourself
Hmm.
to know yourself enough to be self-resourcing, right? Whole in yourself. So that then two people relatively whole in themselves can come together, and then you face relationships are the best way to see your stuff. Anything that you haven't
Like a
healed
mirror.
and that you're hung up, yeah, are gonna is gonna get brought up in relationships. And so
Hmm.
there's when you get to that place of tension and conflict and your stuff, and then you don't see your stuff, and right, it can get so mucky and difficult. And then then kind of good to just sort of take a step back, come back to yourself and know thyself, and understand the patterns of dynamic interaction between people. The pattern recognition, again, is so important on the level of partnerships.
Totally.
Yeah.
Love it. So, you mentioned when we were preparing for this interview how understanding natural law principles can really help guide us
Mm-hmm.
towards optimal mental health. I'd love to
Mm-hmm.
hear more about that.
Mm-hmm. It's something that I've been thinking about in a number of different ways. But one way is like looking at the Hermetic principles and looking at those principles as guides to, well, understanding the universe, right, of which we are a part. And so if mentalism, is a principle,
Mm,
then healing will include a mental component and understanding all the aspects of the power of the mind, the thought, emotion. So mentalism, the thoughts and emotions, and the power of our mind. So a huge way of healing is through cognitive restructuring, cognitive, looking at your thoughts, the power of our thoughts, and so and being maintaining good thoughts, right? Understanding the power of the word, the importance of emotional clearing and things like that. You look at the concept of vibration, and then it brings me to all this new, not new, it's ancient, but becoming more acknowledged now around energy healing and sound, and that we are energetic beings, and emotion is energetic thoughts are energetic. There's magnetism, so understanding those principles, we're going to start to understand ourselves, which is the principle of correspondence.
sure.
So, you know, right. So these aspects of, the Hermetic principles, I think, give us a guide, rhythm. If, you're not sleeping, if your sleep cycle's all whacked, part of it, one thing you can do is you can, create a rhythm of your sleep cycle. You can work on raising vibrations through clearing out blockages energetically. You can do state change activities to shift your emotion from fear to confidence, and there's a lot of wisdom that we can take that'll lead to practical actions,
Mm,
to maintain our health and wellness and to bring it back into balance. The gender principle I think of as the balanced brain, the masculine and feminine, you know, uh, there's a whole lot there. Polarities, we often our thinking becomes really polarized, and then in there's a concept of the wise mind, which is sort of the idea of, you're not all emotional and you're not all intellectual, but there's an overlap in the middle where the wisdom is. You can sort of do states. So if you're like really in the polarity of fatigue, right, then you might decide that what I need to do something energizing. I'm going to play energizing music. I'm going to dance to it. It can be a bit prescriptive looking at those. And so that's one aspect of how I think of how natural law can help us to heal. And then I think nature itself,
mm.
observing nature and
And being in
learning,
nature.
yeah, being in nature, being present, in nature and connecting. Again, like feeling our connection in a deep way to, the natural entities around us and
Mm,
their energy, their spirit.
totally. I
And
think also
yeah.
being alone in nature and being okay with that probably
Mm-hmm.
terrifies a lot of people too, because there's no distractions, there's no one else there to blame or project on. It's just you and you together, having it
Yeah.
out and figuring your shit out. Deeply
Yeah.
profound.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't like being alone or in silence at
Right.
all, because that's when the thoughts start rolling up. The discomfort, the restlessness, the negative thoughts, the memories. A lot of people are on the run from that stuff, you know.
Exactly. And often the
Mm-hmm.
biggest healing and growth is just on the other side of your fears. So there's a reason you feel that way, but rather than avoidance, we need to be going head first
Mm-hmm.
into our
Yeah.
shit.
Step into the shadow. Step into the fear. And so we need to do what we need to do to prepare ourselves to be able to do that, right?
Yeah.
And stay present.
Yeah. Be okay not being okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And
Great
recognize
stuff.
we all have stuff, right? We all have things to heal, and it's a process. And when you can come to a place, I think another part of healing is compassion for oneself.
Mm.
It's accepting oneself and one's imperfections, accepting
Your
and loving
feelings.
oneself despite, yeah, loving all the feelings, not just thinking you got to be in the high vibration feelings, but all feelings,
Right.
and accepting, the mistakes you've made along the way, the things you regret, and it's a lot of stuff.
Totally. Forgiveness, compassion.
Mm-hmm.
So we are getting, towards the end on time here. So I'd love to hear, what are you currently working on and where can the audience
Yeah.
find you?
Okay. So I do have a website, alivethrive.life, and that has some of my work on it. And I am on the One Great Work Network, and that has a little bit of work on it. I am going to be doing a presentation at the upcoming Funnel 2 Convergence Conference, Freedom Under Natural Law. And we're calling it the Convergence because we are really recognizing that we need to come together
Mm-hmm.
to create a powerful change, through natural law in the endeavor of freedom. And our slogan, our qualities that we're really highlighting are unity, focus, and action.
Love it.
And my presentation is called Real Happiness, What It Is and Why It's So Important to Cultivate as we do the One Great Work. And I'm excited about, that presentation coming out.
Of
So,
course. No, I'm excited too. That's where I first saw your work was on the presentation you did. I believe it was on Seed 4 with Nathan or
it was the
or
funnel,
Brandon.
the first funnel. in
Oh, was it?
February. It was
Okay.
the corruption of character.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I was just blown away by that, especially being that was your first presentation, right?
Um, Pretty much. I think I had just done some interviews and things,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Did an amazing job. I mean, just delivered it so succinctly in a way that was very easy to understand and relatable, and excellent points and everything like that. Amazing job. So
Thank,
I'm really looking forward to seeing your next one.
thank you. I really appreciate the feedback because I think we're all our own worst critics and
Oh
get in
yeah,
our own way. So
for sure.
yeah.
So everyone, check her out. I'll put the links down in the description below. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, again, please give the video a quick like. It's free and it helps the channel out a lot and gets this video to be seen by more people. So thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next episode. And until then, be empowered, be inspired, and be encouraged.